Across the centuries, the search for truth has never ceased, and one mind still stands as a guiding light. Welcome to the Thomistic Mind with Dr. Reed. I'm Dr. Jason Reed, Associate Professor of Philosophy and Chair of the Theology and Philosophy Department at Divine Word College Seminary. In addition to teaching seminarians and religious at Divine Word, I also teach those in formation for the Permanent Diaconate Program in the Archdiocese of Dubuque, offering courses like the Philosophy of God, Christology, Metaphysics, Epistemology, and Trinitarian Theology. Here, we walk in the footsteps of St. Thomas Aquinas, exploring the mysteries of existence, the nature of God, and the pursuit of wisdom that shapes the soul. That journey begins now. Welcome to another episode of the Thomistic Mind with Dr. Jason Reed. In this talk, we will continue our exploration into the nature of logic itself and argument. And I've been teaching logic for a long time, longer than I want to admit. And I will tell you, it's one of those disciplines that it's always good to review, always good to think these things through. So if it becomes sort of repetitive, that's not necessarily a bad thing when we get started. And so I think we're now to the point where if you listen to the last few episodes and you've been thinking about it and reflecting upon it and committing some of these concepts to memory, we can now move on to discussing the different actual arguments themselves, start putting logic to work. So again, right, there's so much missing, there's so much lacking of genuine training in how reasoning works. There's very little serious thinking about what logic is, about how to draw inferences, right? Logic is the study of how we should think, not what we should think. And so the last episode, I ended with the nature of the syllogism, and I talked about how syllogisms are simple in structure, very powerful in persuasion. And the example I gave from last time was the simple statement that there's no one who seeks God. A premise comes out of Romans. Well, I am a one. I am a one. Therefore, what follows? I don't seek God. There's a window into humility. How can one be humble? Well, a simple syllogism can help. I don't seek God. He seeks me. Syllogisms write simple arguments, two premises, and deduce a conclusion. So for this talk, for this episode, we're going to begin the first segment with a certain kind of syllogism. So here is, if you've never had logic before, here is your first real introduction to an argument, or the kind of syllogism. And we're going to discuss the hypothetical syllogism. It's built around the if-then statement. And I'll just say this, that to think if-then, to understand a hypothetical is a very good sign of how educated one is. If you can understand the hypothetical, you will strengthen your thinking. You'll be able to read better. You'll be able to think clearer. So, the hypothetical syllogism is based upon the if-then statement. If is a very powerful two-letter word, right? If this, then that. If I were a gazillionaire, right? Then, that sorts of things. Or if, think about this, if Judas had never been born, right? You can think of it, that powerful if. So in hypothetical syllogisms, as you remember from last time, syllogisms have two premises and a conclusion. In a hypothetical syllogism, the first premise is an if-then, and standard notation is if P, then Q, right? Mind your P's and Q's. That's a good reminder. If P, then Q. Then the second premise is either an affirmation of the P or a denial of the Q. And then the conclusion is either the affirming of the Q or denying the P. What does that mean? Okay. Well, one is called Modus Ponens, and the other is called Modus Tollens. Modus potens is way of affirmation. Modus tollens is way of negation. Now let's get some examples just to see how we use this all the time, right? So modus potens and modus tollens, you may not have heard those words before, but the inference we do all the time. So let's look at a famous argument, or the basic argument for Calvinism. The basic argument for Calvinism is a syllogism, a hypothetical syllogism. The first premise is, if God exists, then humans are not free. Now just think about that. So here's what the argument gets you to think about. The claim is, if God exists, then humans aren't free. They're not free in what sense? Well, here's what Calvin is thinking. Well, if you really think about your life, what's been really up to you? Did you decide whether you existed or not? No. Did you get to decide where you were born, who your parents were, what your genes are, what your talents are? The answer is no. This is so counter-cultural today, right? This is very much against how people think in the world today. Here's what we hear. You can be whatever you want. You can do whatever you want. If you put in the work and if you work hard, right, you can be whatever you want. The world is your oyster. Well, that's not true. That's not true. Why is it true? Well, I get into a lot of arguments with family members and friends about travel sports. Travel sports is crazy. When I played sports, you didn't get a really cool baseball bag until you'd become something, right? You had either made the varsity team or you made the college team. Then you got the real fancy baseball bag with your equipment, and you got the cleats and the bat and all that stuff. I mean, that was a big deal. When you made varsity, or if you made a college baseball team, you got your bag. Well, now they're getting these fancy bags when they're 8. And they're traveling to tournaments. They're state champions. They're all-stars everywhere. Everyone's an all-star. Everyone's a championship team. Everyone's got the best player, so on and so forth. And so what are they selling people? Well, if you write the checks and you go and you participate in all of these tournaments and all these practices, then you will be on the team or you'll be on varsity. But it's not just the positive thing they're selling you. It's the fear that they're using as well. Because if you don't do travel ball, if you don't join the travel team, if you don't join that, well, then you're going to miss out. You won't get the practice you need. You won't become the varsity player. You won't start, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the reason I go round and round with folks is because whether people want to admit it or not, a person's bank account, their PIN cannot write a check that creates an offensive tackle. There is no PIN that you can write a check to that can make someone throw the ball 90 miles an hour. There is no checkbook that you can write. There is no practice that you can perform that's going to teach you to give you the ability to stop running almost full speed and then cut to your left. It's just, there isn't one. Then who is responsible for the ability to cut to your left almost at a full stop? Who's responsible for whether or not you've got the kind of feet and size to be a left tackle for the Hawkeyes? Who's giving you the quick twitch muscle so you can throw the ball 90 miles an hour? God. I remember when I wanted to play college baseball more than anything. and I talked to the catching coach, and I said, what can I do? I mean, I was still working pretty hard, and I had a good throw to second. But I wanted to really, I wanted to be, a major leaguer. I wanted to be someone who's like one of the best at throwing the ball. And so I asked the coach, I said, what can I do to throw the ball harder? And he said to me, God makes arm strength. God gives you velocity. Man, that made me mad. I was like, what are you talking about? I mean, I'm not free. I can't choose. I can't work at it. The answer is no. The answer is no. One of my brother-in-laws, when he walks into the room, he's your starting guard. I mean, an offensive lineman. I mean, I don't care. You can go to all the, you can go to all the camps. A person can go all the camps on offensive line play. They can read the books. They can work as hard as they want, and they can show up on the practice field for tryouts. And if my brother-in-law walks onto the field, he's starting before you. That's just the way it is. He's just got that body. He's just a big dude, and he's tough. He's going to be playing. So that's the point of Calvinism. That's the point that's so countercultural. God makes teachers. God makes workers. I mean, my dad is a genius carpenter. I remember being a kid, and really a little kid, and the dryer, I think it was the dryer, broke. And this was in the old bathroom. And I went in there as a kid, and the whole thing was like tore apart. And I'm looking at my dad, I'm like, what do you do? I was curious. And he was just took it apart, said it didn't work. He took it apart, figured it out, got the right part, and put it back together. He can just do that. He can just see certain things. Now, of course, having the talent doesn't by itself give results. I mean, my dad's a very curious person. He reads a lot. He's always thinking about things. He's always trying to figure things out. So he nurtures that talent of his. Okay? So he's not just resting on his talent. He nourishes it, and he tries to actualize that talent. But I don't have that. It would take me a longer time to do that. I mean, maybe I could do that, but it would take me longer to do it. I'm more like my mom in the sense I have more of a teaching, personality. It's easy for me to talk about things and think things through than it is to do what my dad does. Okay, so who made my dad a carpenter? Not my dad. God made him that. Right? Who made Robert Gallery a left tackle? God made him that. Right? Not 100%, but that's a lot of it. Okay? So here, what's Calvin saying? If there is a God, humans are not free to be what they are. They're not free to be where they are. They're not free to be what kind of person they are. They're not free in their temperaments. They're not free in their interests. Because I have friends who push back and say, okay, you might have talent, but you've got a work ethic. Well, where'd the work ethic come from? Right? Where did your work ethic come from? Well, Calvin's going to say that even comes from God. And so Calvin then takes this idea of God's existence and how much God ordains, how much of God decrees, and what does Calvin say? Well, that's just simply incompatible with human beings have any sort of contribution to what God is doing. Human beings are not free if there's a God. That's Calvin's point. If God exists, human beings have no real significant freedom. Again, to be who they are, to exist where they are and when, etc. So everything I've just laid out. Okay. Think what Calvin would say to all of these parents who try to use and write the paycheck. I'm not saying everyone does travel ball. I'm not saying that, but it's undeniable that that's the atmosphere, that's the mood. Okay. All right. So then, what does the Calvinist say? Once you buy into that premise, then here's the next premise. So then God does exist. God exists. If God exists and I'm not really free in any meaningful sense, I haven't said whether I'm free or not yet. I haven't said, am I free? It's just, here's the idea. And if God exists, well, then human beings are not free. Now, if you've studied Calvinism and soteriology, start getting into deeper theology, Calvinism takes that logical principle, that logical conclusion, human beings aren't free, and continues to work that out. That is, the conclusion human beings are not free becomes a premise for further argumentation. Now you're starting to see how systematic theology works. All right, once you take this simple syllogism, if God exists, human beings aren't free, and you're convinced of this, the strong implication there, and then you just affirm God exists, well, then human beings aren't free, you're a Calvinist. And Calvinism appeals to lots of people. There are lots of Calvinists in the world because of this nice, neat, and powerful, simple syllogism. Okay, that's called Modus Ponens. Okay, if P then Q, P therefore Q. Okay. Ironically, that same argument, that same premise, if God exists, human beings aren't free, becomes the argument for atheism. Becomes the argument for atheism. And I have in mind Jean Paul Sartre. Now, if you've just joined us, this is the Thomistic Mind show. I'm your host, Dr. Jason Reed, Professor of Philosophy at Divine Word College Seminary. I also teach part-time in the Permanent Diaconate program of the Archdiocese of Dubuque. And what we're looking at is how a premise that was used to show that Calvinism is true is going to be the same premise to show that atheism is true. And so if you want to get the book where Jean Paul Sartre argues this way, it's called Existentialism and Human Emotions, where Jean Paul Sartre lays out in a very Calvinistic way the things I've just been talking about. If there is a God, if there's a creator, then here's what that entails. A creator does this, a creator decrees this. So this very strong, high view of God. So in a sense, Jean Paul Sartre, in a very deep sense, Jean Paul Sartre and Jean Calvin, although they couldn't be more opposed to each other in their views of God, agree on the premise. If there is a God, I'm not free. Humans aren't free. They both agree. What does Jean Paul Sartre then say? He argues, well, here's the problem. I am free. I am free. It is up to me to decide what I'm going to be. It is up to me to decide how I'm going to live my life and what sort of a vocation I'm going to have and how I'm going to spend my life and what decisions I make, the kind of character I'm going to be. It's completely up to me. And so if God exists and humans are not free, if humans are free, it follows God does not exist. And here is an interesting entailment. The major premise for Jean-Paul Sartre's atheism is a premise that most people today believe. I think this is why lots of people may give lip service to the existence of God, but they're more interested in their own freedom. They're more interested and they're more committed to the value they place on their ability to make choices for themselves. It's up to them to decide what they're going to. I mean, just think about this is everywhere in the culture. It's you. You decide, you decide, you decide. You're free to be whatever you want to be. And Jean Paul Sartre says, good, you're an atheist. You're an atheist. Oh, no, I believe in God. Well, then Jean Paul Sartre is going to say, well, then you're not all that free. Again, the power of validity, the power of logic. If you think God exists and somehow you're not free, then Jean Paul Sartre said, if you're going to have a strong view of freedom, the kind of freedom that the culture teaches, you can literally be whatever you want. You can define reality and make reality how you see fit. Then there is no God. Moreover, both arguments are valid. John Calvin's argument's valid. Jean Paul Sartre's argument's valid. Meaning, if you accept their premises, you have to accept their conclusion. Either way. So in a sense, you're either going to believe in Calvin or an atheist. Either atheism is true or there's this very strong creator God view. There isn't a third option. And again, that's what these arguments are purporting to claim. So they're both valid. Meaning, in both of those arguments, saying this is how logic works. Now we're learning to see that is reason is showing a form of reasoning that is valid. That is, both these arguments are good arguments. Calvin's argument is modus ponens. M-O-D-U-S P-O-N-E-N-S. Again, you can look that up on the internet and find out what modus ponens is. If P, then Q, P, therefore Q. If God exists, humans aren't free. God exists, humans are not free. Then Sartre is modus tollens. Same premise. If P, then Q. Not Q, therefore not P. So they're both valid. And again, what's nice about that is then you've got a real opportunity for some serious debate. Right? That is the better one understands modus totus and modus tollens, you can really go at it, because a Calvinist is going to give all these arguments for why there is a God. Because if a Calvinist can give arguments for why there is a God, well, then he's going to show that the sort of freedom that the atheist thinks he has doesn't have. Whereas Sartre, the atheist, are going to show that no, we really are free. They're going to really hammer out the free, because we are free in such a way that your God can't exist. And so now we have a meaningful debate, because the terms are clear and both syllogisms are valid. And now it's up to giving the best case for your argument. Another example of how you can have valid arguments using modus tollens and modus ponens. Here's a famous argument by C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis argued, if morality is objective, then God exists. And then, of course, this is in Mere Christianity, in the first part, where he just over and over again argues how morality is objective, right? It's not, the objectivity of morality is not based on herd. It's not based upon custom. It's not based upon power. It's not based upon a vote. He just goes through all the different things that morality cannot be based upon. So therefore, morality must be based upon some objective standard. And if morality is objective, then God exists. So if morality is objective, then God exists. Morality is objective, therefore God exists. And now there are some atheists who take that argument and turn it into a modus tollens, someone like a J.L. Mackie. Even John Paul Sartre. They'll say, okay, I agree with you. If morality is objective, then God exists. But we're atheists. There isn't a God. And therefore, morality is not objective. Very powerful conclusion, meaning what? That if there is no God, then the objectivity of morality goes with it. Welcome to the world's moral malaise. Why is moral relativism feel like it's in our DNA? Why does moral relativism feel like it's in every breath we take? It's in all the air that we breathe. Because non-belief is on the rise. And when you get rid of God, then you get rid of the objectivity of morality. That is why I think there's anything above humans, human interests, human reasoning, human projects, human wishes, in which morality should be judged by. So in a sense, moral relativism is also goes with atheism. Now again, I'm not saying all atheists are moral relativists. I mean, that would be a silly thing to say because it's not true. I'm just saying is that for those atheists who do not believe that morality is objective, they would have something to argue about. Okay, that is, someone like a Sam Harris or what's his name, the British biologist, Dawkins, they would want to try to ground morality in some sort of objectivity, but yet make that compatible with God not existing. And so that's a debate amongst atheists. Atheists debate amongst themselves whether or not, excuse me, can have a morality is objective in the absence of God. Okay. And sometimes what they do is, some people say, no, if God exists, morality can't be objective. And so that's what's called divine command theory. And so there are theists who say, no, morality is not objective. Morality is based upon God's will. And so if God will say that you should commit idolatry, well, then that would be morally right. That is, if God wills it, then it's good. And if it's good, God willed it. That sort of thing. You see that in Euthyphro's Dilemma from Plato. Anyway, the point being is, right, these are both valid arguments, right? Just like the Sartre-Calvin. Here we've got Lewis and Sartre. We have a premise: if morality is objective, God exists. So then Lewis argues morality is objective, and therefore God exists. So when you go and you read that book, look for that. That's the argument. If you read the atheist version, say, no, there is no God, therefore the morality is anything but objective, right? It's cultural relativism, or it's a sociological account of morality. So you can see, hopefully you can see a lot of the world today, how they think about morality. Lots of people who think that God doesn't exist, they're going to ground morality in sociological, psychological factors, observations. Whereas those who believe that there is an objective moral law, they're going to ground that in reason. They're going to ground that in philosophy. And so these are real clear lines of demarcation between these views. That's what logic is doing. Logic is bringing together way different understandings of the world in such a way that we can actually dialogue with each other. Okay, so we're coming up on the end of our first segment here on this episode of the Thomistic Mind, where we were looking at the syllogism. And we looked at a very interesting aspect of syllogisms, namely the modus ponens and modus tollens, different ways of putting together premises and their conclusion. And they're based upon these, that is, the modus ponens and modus tollens is based upon the hypothetical proposition, if P then Q. And then it forms different argument patterns. And the takeaway is any argument that follows those argument patterns are valid. So are there valid atheistic arguments? Yes. Are there valid arguments for Calvinism? Yes. Are there valid arguments for the existence of God? Yes. And therefore, we can start to see, well, which premise is right, which premise is not right. So we'll take a break here now. We're coming to the end of this episode. It's about a 2-minute break. We have a 2-minute commercial. Please stay tuned. We'll be back in 2 minutes. The Church teaches that a solid education and grounding in philosophy is necessary to find the truth and avoid error, to understand the mysteries of divine revelation, to grasp the Church's doctrine, and to engage an unbelieving world. Philosophy is so valued by the Church that she requires it to form the intellectual life of her priests. Read Thomas is an online program created to make this intellectual formation more widely accessible. Developed and taught by Dr. Jason Reed, the courses combine academic rigor with a spirit of faith, presenting the great themes of classical and Thomistic philosophy in a way that is clear, structured, and faithful to the Catholic intellectual tradition. Participants encounter fundamental questions of philosophy through topics such as the pursuit of wisdom, an introduction to philosophy, an overview of philosophy's origins, methods, and enduring questions. There's He Who Is, examining the classical view of God's attributes and their theological and spiritual implications. We also have the mystery of existence, the philosophy of creation, exploring the metaphysical principles underlying the doctrine of creation. Then we have the three-person God, the mystery of God's inner life, a philosophical study of the Trinity's interrelations. There's also St. Thomas Aquinas' Philosophy of the Angels, where we consider the nature and role of spiritual beings in Thomistic thought, and further courses that engage the treasures of the Catholic intellectual tradition. Read Thomas seeks to cultivate not only knowledge, but also a deeper appreciation of the harmony between faith and reason, helping participants enter more fully into the wisdom of St. Thomas Aquinas and the Church's philosophical heritage. The website is www.readthomist.com. That's www.readthomist.com. Email is read.thomist@gmail.com. That's reed.thomist@gmail.com. At Read Thomas, we believe the life of the mind is for every Christian. And we're back to the second segment of this episode, episode 11, where we're looking at the nature of a syllogism. We just talked about hypothetical syllogisms. What's the syllogism? Two premises, conclusion. What's hypothetical about them is that you have a hypothetical premise, the if-then premise. Now, if you are new to that sort of line of thinking, you're going to see the if-then everywhere in the New Testament. You're going to see it everywhere in theology books. You're going to see it everywhere online in debates. If this, then that is a standard, fundamental, logical statement. And then out of the hypothetical statement, you get two argument forms. Modus Ponens, M-U-D-U-S, P-O-N-E-S, which is the way of affirmation. If P, then Q. P, then infer Q. Modus Tollens, which is the way of denial, M-O-D-U-S, T-O-L-L-E-N-S. If P, then Q, not P. And we just did a nice job. Hopefully I did a nice job, I should say it's me, looking at how those valid argument forms lead to valid arguments for God, valid arguments against the existence of God, valid arguments for Calvinism, valid arguments for atheism, so on and so forth. Okay, so the second type of syllogism we're looking at is a disjunctive syllogism, and this is the either A or B syllogism. And the valid form, again, syllogisms, you have two premises, either A or B, then you deny one, and then you infer the other. So it's either A or B, and if you know it's not A, then you know that B follows. And this is the famous logical pattern of the C.S. Lewis's liar, lunatic, Lord trilemma. So the first premise is Jesus Christ. If you're talking, here's a example now. You've got several episodes of what logic is. Now let's see how you could use it. You're talking to someone about Christianity. You're talking to someone about Christology, and they're not quite sure. Well, you can ask them this question. Jesus Christ is either a liar, he's either crazy, he's a lunatic, or he really is Lord. Now there's a fourth option called legend, but I'm not going to get into that right now. That's more of a technical debate. The point is, so the Jesus of the New Testament is either he's lying, he's a lunatic, or he is who he says he is. And so how does the argument work? The next premise would be, show he's not a liar. Again, we just find this in C.S. Lewis. He's not a liar. The third premise, he's not a lunatic. Then what follows logically? The only alternative is Lord. That's a good argument. Now, if someone doesn't want to say that he's Lord, they're going to have to say either he's lying about who he is, or he's crazy. He's an imbecile. He's a lunatic. And now you've got what? Now you can actually have a conversation. Now you can actually have a debate. You can actually have a dialogue. Because the logical rule of disjunctive syllogism, now of course you don't have to say it like that, but the more you understand the science of the logic behind this case, you'll have a better understanding of what's going on. And you can kind of keep someone's feet to the fire, right? Or even think like John chapter 6 for my non-Catholic audience, right? When Jesus says, eat my flesh or drink my blood, that's either literal or it's not. If it's not literal, then it's either like memorial or it's symbolic, however you want to lay that out. And then I'm not arguing for the literal reading directly. I can show that it's not. There's nothing memorial about it. There's nothing symbolic about it. And so what follows is it has to be literal. And so that's the power of the disjunctive syllogism. You give a certain amount of options, you remove all but one, and then you simply entail that one. And so disjunctive syllogism can also be called like a dilemma type reasoning. And this sort of dilemma type reasoning can be found when Jesus is questioned. And so now let's look at, for the first time, let's now look at the scripture itself. Let's look at Jesus Christ being an example of logical reasoning. And so the passage I have in mind is Mark chapter 11, if you got your Bible with you, or you got your phone, Mark chapter 11, verses 27 through 33. And I believe this is the New Revised Catholic Edition, I believe. Quote, again they came to Jerusalem. As he was walking in the temple, the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders came to him and said, by what authority are you doing these things? Who gave you this authority to do them? Jesus said to them, I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I do these things. Did the baptism of John come from heaven, or was it of human origin? There is a disjunction. Either from heaven or from human origin. So there's your disjunctive premise, A or B. And then Jesus says, answer me. Now, what do? They start thinking logically. They argued one to one another. If we say, there's your hypothetical, if we say from heaven, if from heaven, he will say, then why did you not believe him? If this, then that. But if we say of human origin, if we say that, they were afraid of the crowd, for all John regarded as a prophet. This is a combination of disjunctive and hypothetical, so we can construct the argument. Here's Jesus' first premise. Baptism of John, either from heaven or from men, either this or that, A or B. They thought, well, if it's from heaven, then we should believe him. But we don't. We don't believe him. What if it's from men? Well, then the people will reject us, and we don't want that. What logically follows their reasoning? What logically follows those premises? Here's what logically follows. Either we don't want to believe him, or we don't want to be rejected. That's why it's called dilemma. Neither option is a good one. They don't want either one. So what's their answer? Well, that's what they have to say. That is the Sadducees and the Pharisees. They're pretty well trained in how to think. I don't know if they had like logic class in their synagogues, but they know how to reason. And they see the implication. And for those of you that know your scripture, you know what they said. So they answered Jesus, we don't know. We don't know. Because we can't say either one. And so Jesus said to them, neither will I tell you by what authority I'm doing these things. Okay, so what's the point? You should believe him. But you don't. So are you really interested in where his authority comes from? I love this about the Lord. The reason he's not answering them because they're not really interested in where his authority comes from. That is, this is what logic cut through. It cut through their false intention. Their question is just a facade. They're not interested in finding his authority. They're not interested in getting the answer. They just want him to shut up. They want to get. They're trying to catch him. They want a gotcha moment. And Jesus turns it around on them using an argument form that's valid and entails a conclusion. Given the premises, from heaven or from men, if heaven, believe him. If from men, we'll be rejected. And so they just don't answer. And so why should he answer them? Because they don't really care. They don't care. They don't care where John's authority came from. So logically speaking, they are committed to affirming their unbelief or their fear of people. And so they chose to avoid Jesus' argument by claiming ignorance. A tremendous, great use of logic. Isn't that great? I love that. There's so many examples of that in the scriptures. There's so much evidence and use of logic in the catechism and apologetics. I mean, yeah, the better you can get at this, just the freer you'll feel, just the more confidence you'll have in even just talking to someone. I mean, one of the things that people struggle with today is like, I don't feel like if I say anything, I'm going to come across as silly or whatever, or I'm going to come across as I don't know any better. Or you have too much confidence and you're just going to go out there anyway and say things that might backfire on you. What we're learning about logic is, we see it in the Lord's interaction with the Pharisees, is how it can bring people to an awareness of their own thoughts. I think I don't think they realize that these Pharisees, they didn't realize how not interested in the truth they were. And of course, some of the Pharisees, right, through dialogue with Jesus, I mean, they do convert, right? Nicodemus converted, Joseph of Arimathea, quite a few. Okay, so we've talked about truth, we've talked about logic, we talked about truth, validity, we've looked at argument statements. Now we're going to put it all together now. What is the goal of all of this? The goal of the argument, the goal of logic is soundness. The goal of logic and the goal of argumentation is what the philosophers call proof. A proof. As we've discussed, validity is about structure. Validity is about form, whether the conclusion logically follows the premises or not. Truth. Truth is about the content, whether the premises and the conclusion actually match reality or not. Now, in logic or in argument, these two don't always line up. You might start with true premises but reach a false conclusion if your reasoning is invalid. Right, you can have true premises but have a false conclusion because the form is bad. Or you might reason perfectly but end up with a false conclusion, like Sartre. Right, Sartre's argument is logically flawless. Right, people can give arguments for the existence of God with true premises, but the reasoning is faulty. So again, just to repeat that, right? In logic, validity and truth don't always line up. You might start from true premises, reach a false conclusion. Why? The reasoning is invalid. Or you might reason perfectly, correctly, but end up with a false conclusion, like God doesn't exist, because one or more of your premises isn't true to begin with. So then what's the ideal? It's obvious. The ideal argument is called sound when both of these conditions are met. The premises are true, and the conclusion follows validly from those premises. If either part fails, if the reasoning is invalid, or if even one premise is false, the argument is unsound. And so that's the gold standard in logic. What's the gold standard? The sound argument. Gives us a conclusion we can have confidence when we accept as true. Right, the gold standard in logic is a sound argument. So, when you read in the catechism, or you read like in a council or an encyclical, and it says that, like for example in Vatican I, that reason, or the church teaches that reason can prove, or philosophy can prove the existence of God, they don't mean scientific proof. They don't mean that it's going to persuade everybody. What it means is that there are sound arguments whose conclusion is God exists. You can read that in St. Thomas Aquinas. You can read that in Anselm. You can read that in St. Augustine. You can read that in Fulton Sheen. You can read that in Cardinal Newman, Garrigou-Lagrange, Bishop Barron, so on and so forth. Thomas Joseph White, Father Whipple. There are proofs in this sense that there are arguments whose premises are true and the logic valid, whose conclusion is God exists. That's what the church means when it says that philosophy can prove the existence of God. Again, right, doesn't mean that everyone accepts it, right? That doesn't mean everyone's persuaded by it. I mean, I can't tell you, oftentimes when people read that, think, wait a minute, no, it's not proof because not everyone believes. Proof is an objective feature of arguments. Persuasion is a subjective truth about persons. Okay, so let's look at a couple of examples of soundness in action. Let's look at a few examples to make soundness crystal clear. Premise 1, all humans are mortal. Premise 2, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. This argument is both valid, the conclusion logically follows, and has true premises, so it's sound. Now you might want to say all human persons are mortal, right? Because Jesus is human, but he's not a human person. So it might be, make it clear, all human persons are mortal. Socrates is a human person, therefore Socrates is mortal. Means what? He's capable of death. And because it's sound, the conclusion must also be true. So that's just an example. A valid but unsound argument. Here the reasoning is fine, but one premise isn't true. All fish are mammals. All salmon are fish. Therefore, all salmon are mammals. This argument is valid because the conclusion logically follows from the premises, but it's unsound because it's false that all fish are mammals. So again, the first one, true and valid. Second one, valid but not true. And then third, here we have the reasoning itself doesn't hold up, although all the premises are true. All cats are mammals, true. Fido is an animal, also true. Therefore, Fido is a cat, doesn't follow. So even though the premises are true, the conclusion does not follow, and therefore, so the argument is invalid, and therefore it is unsound. I remember one time I was taking a philosophy class, and one of my professors, it was a philosophy of religion class at the university, and his name was Dr. Klemke, world-famous skeptic, very well-known philosopher. He was an expert on G.E. Moore, and we were going over, I think it was Leibniz's argument for God's existence. And there's maybe 15 to 20 of us in there, and most of us were philosophy majors. There were, well, let's just say probably 2/3 were philosophy majors, and a third were non-philosophy majors. Well, the president of the philosophy club was in there, and he, at the time, was a skeptic, might be an atheist. And Dr. Klemke put Leibniz's argument on the board, and he said the argument is valid. And we all just were aghast because we all understood Dr. Klemke to be a skeptic. So we're thinking, you think that argument's valid? And so we're all like, okay, so you believe in God? You think there is a theistic God? So we're just kept hammering. Said, nope, I think it's valid, but I still don't believe. Like, we just could not get our heads around what he was talking about. And then he pointed to the president. I think he actually might have been T.A.ing. And he asked the older student, so I think it's valid, but what do I deny? And his student raised his hand. You don't think it's sound. I'm like, what's that mean? And so he explained to us, just because he thinks the argument's valid, he doesn't think that all the premises are true. So he said the argument's unsound. Like, oh, okay. Okay. That was very helpful moving forward. I'll never forget that. We thought he was a believer. We thought, okay, let's get him baptized tomorrow. But he made the distinction between validity and soundness. Now, the argument was valid, but it wasn't sound because it had a false premise. So the takeaway, when you are evaluating an argument or you're giving an argument, you should only accept a conclusion if two things are clear. The reasoning works. It means it's valid. And the statements match reality. They are true. Soundness, you have both. And that's why soundness is the gold standard. That's why soundness is the ultimate goal. Because now you've done what? You've reached the truth through correct reasoning. Just think about that for a second. When the argument is sound, then the whole reason why you reason, the whole purpose, the whole goal for why anybody reasons and puts arguments, so you can find the truth. And that's what we want. We want the truth. And therefore we want sound argument. Therefore we want what? Valid form and true premises. So this is the Thomistic Mind with Dr. Jason Reed. We're finishing up segment 2, talking about the goal of reasoning. The goal of reasoning is to find the truth. Truth about what? Truth about things that we don't know about, right? Giving arguments for things we're not quite sure if they're true or not. Giving arguments for claims that it's not evident to us whether it's true or not. So that's sound arguments. And sound arguments can really bring to light things that we had never seen before. And so now let's look at sound arguments. Let's look at all of this in action. We've got just a few minutes here left. Hopefully I can get through it. But this is where, I think this is in Matthew 22, I think. Yes, Matthew 22, I think. Anyway, it's a question about the resurrection. And for whatever reason, I forgot to put the Bible reference in my notes. But here's Christ giving a famous sound argument. The Sadducees thinking they're giving a sound argument. The same day, Sadducees came to him saying, there is no resurrection. And they asked him a question saying, Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies childless, his brother shall marry the widow and raise up children for his brother. Now, there were 7 brothers among us. So it sounds like this is a real story. It's just really happened. And died childless, leaving the widow to his brother. The second did the same, so also the third, down to the 7th. Last of all, the woman died herself. In the resurrection, then whose wife of the 7 will she be? For all of them had married her. End quote. So what's going on here? Well, one question to ask as you're reading this, why do the Sadducees think that this is significant? Why not just say, well, she's married to all of them, or she's married to one of them? That is, there's something going on that they think that they've got a sound argument. They think that through this bit of reasoning that they've got Jesus cornered. Now, without the use of logical skill, whether it's you're trained or not, it's going to be difficult to see, well, why do they think they've got him? This is where you have to you apply logic, apply the rules of the syllogism to what the Sadducees are saying, and you can draw out the implied conclusion, and then you'll see the significance of Jesus's response. So first, let's just reconstruct the argument. So the first premise would be, and we're going to be running out of time here, so I will just lay out the premise, and then we'll pick up this argument next episode. So premise 1 is, if a man dies having no son, his brother shall marry his wife and raise up children for his brother. That's the law. All right, that's what Moses taught. Okay, so that's a true premise. That's the law. Second premise, there were 7 brothers. That's just a statement of fact. Okay, so that's true. Next premise, the first having married a wife died, and not having issue, not having children, left his wife to his brother. That's also a fact and lawful. That's a key, right? So not only is it a fact, it's a lawful, right? That should happen. 4, in like manner, the second and the third and so on to the 7th. That's also a fact, and it's also lawful. And then finally, last of all, the women also died. Also a fact. Now, what I want you to ask, the puzzle then, the question I want you to be thinking about for the next episode is, why that question? They asked him, at the resurrection, therefore, whose wife of the 7 shall she be? For they all had her. Why do the Sadducees think this is a puzzle for Jesus to solve? Why do the Sadducees think this is a problem? Why is this a puzzle? Okay, this is the Thomistic Mind with Dr. Jason Reed, where we have spent quite a few episodes going through logic. I really hope that you are learning a lot. I hope that this is inspiring you. I hope that you've done some of your own research and maybe try to find some good books. I think, not this episode, but in a couple episodes, I will start putting together some books for you to go look at, some books to find. Again, pay attention to the Reed Thomist website. Maybe some updates there regarding these sorts of topics, which I would encourage you to take a look at. And just seeing how now we're starting to dive into just how logic is embedded in the scripture. It's embedded in our thinking. It's embedded in just the nature of discourse, the nature of dialogue. And so again, the better that we get at logic, the more, and again, it's a lifetime pursuit. It's a lifetime pursuit. So the sooner you start, the sooner you cannot end, as they say. So that's it for today. Thank you for listening. This has been the Thomistic Mind with Dr. Jason Reed, and I'll see you at the next episode. You've been listening to the Thomistic Mind with Dr. Jason Reed, produced by Mr. Matt Graham. To learn more about our rigorous philosophy courses, visit us online at www.reedthomas.com, www.reedthomist.com. It's been a privilege to journey with you through the world of philosophy, seeking truth, goodness, and beauty together. My hope is that today's conversation encourages you to think more deeply, live more wisely, and love more fully. Until next time, keep your mind fixed on the truth and your heart set on the highest good.